So there's an ACT exam coming up in a few days, and you might be wondering what you should be doing to make the most of the time that you have left. I've personally tutored and seen plenty of students who have been able to take just a few days or a week or even a couple weeks and put in a lot of work and actually get 2, 3, even 6 points of improvement within the short amount of time. So definitely make the most of the time that you have. These specific 7 tips that I'm about to give you are the things that I've seen work best for students that are in this scenario. So I'm going to give you 4 tips, 1 for each section, and then 3 extra just in general on how to study and how to make the most of your time. Before I get into that and before we get into the actual tips, be sure to comment any questions that you have about cramming and what maybe your situation is like, as well as subscribe if you want to see more videos from cramming to strategies to skills about the ACT exam. So without further ado, let's get right into this. The first thing that you have to do is make sure you have a sufficient amount of practice under your belt. If you have never done a practice exam before, then try to take a full test. You don't have to do it in one sitting, but make sure that you take an exam, get the idea of what the timing is like, see how you do, just get a gauge of your performance. That's if you haven't done any prep. If you have done some prep before, then I would recommend try to get 1 or 2 full exams under your belt. This applies for both, but 1 or 2 full exams this week. You can structure that however you want. You can do, for example, one study plan you can follow is do 1 or 2 sections per day. If you do that for about 4 or 5 days, then you'll end up at 2 exams, and that'll put you right where you need to be for your practice volume. Now, the question then becomes, what exactly should you do when you take your practice exams? Is there a certain way that you should time yourself? Are there certain strategies that you should be using on reading or English or math or science? That's the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So for English and math, what you absolutely must do is look over your mistakes. And that's the strategy number 3. Make sure that you're looking over your mistakes and seeing what you did wrong. And as you keep taking exams over these next few days, be sure to go back to those problems that you got wrong on your past exams and you redo them or you drill them and review them again. Because the ACT exam tests you on the same skills every time. This absolutely is true for English, absolutely is true for math. So if you feel like you have some skill gaps and you want to fill them, just go back and review your past mistakes. Review the past problems you got wrong and just redo them. And that'll give you the refresher that you need so you don't forget the skills that you learned from those mistakes and you won't make those same mistakes again. Because the worst thing you can do is make the same mistakes again and again and again. That's quite literally the reason why your score might be stagnating on English or math. For reading and science, this is where things are a little bit different. I'll talk about the strategies and what you need to be doing for those 2 sections in just a little bit. So just to recap so far, my 3 general strategies were, first, if you haven't done any practice yet, be sure to take a full exam at least this week and see where you're at. Grade your exam and do everything with timing. The second thing was, if you have done some prep, then take 1 or 2 full exams. That kind of applies to both situations. And keep working towards working on the strategies that you've already developed. And if you feel like your strategies that you're already working with aren't working, use the strategies that I'm about to talk about for the other 4 sections in just a second. And the third thing was to look over your past exams and mistakes for English and math. Now let's talk about the actual specific strategies for each section. So the first one was for English. You absolutely need to know your grammar and punctuation rules. And grammar and punctuation as a whole is very intimidating, and a lot of students don't end up learning it properly in classes because it's not very well taught. I personally didn't learn it very well until I actually started seeing a more simple way to learn about it after high school. So I made a couple videos. I know I'm just making a video here to recommend other videos just for English, but these 2 videos that I'm about to recommend you will give you a short 10 to 15 minute brief, concise, complete understanding that you need of ACT English punctuation and ACT English grammar. We have a video called 5 minutes ACT English punctuation guide, something like that. Everything you need to know about ACT English punctuation in 5 minutes. We have one for grammar as well, and it's in 5 minutes. And then we have an 8-minute punctuation or grammar guide as well. Watch those few videos. I'll link them below or put them in the card or whatever. Those videos will give you everything that you need to know about how to approach those comma questions, those punctuation questions that tend to be really confusing. And most of the English exam is testing you on those specific skills. If you can get those things right, then you're set on the English test for the most part, as long as you get the content and meaning, like the general idea of the passage questions right. But again, I just want to emphasize, comma rules are the main thing on the English exam. That's like the main dish. Everything else is just an appetizer or dessert. So if you can get the comma rules down, if you can get the grammar rules down, the clauses, independent clauses, and you understand it to a T, then you're set on the English exam for the most part. For math, the one strategy that I'll recommend you use is for timing. And this is the most important thing because the exam gets harder as you go, and a lot of students get caught off guard by this. So what you should do, in order to make sure you have the appropriate amount of time on math, is take your 60 minutes and divide it into a 20-minute block and a 40-minute block. So the first 20 minutes, you want to do that at the beginning, and you want to try to answer the first half of the questions in that 20 minutes. So that gives you 40 minutes, which is double the amount of time per question, to answer the last 30 questions. So in the reason you do this is because, like I said, the questions get harder as you go, and the questions at the beginning are very repetitive from exam to exam. If you have a few practice exams under your belt for math, you'll know that the initial few problems, like the first 10 to 20, are the same thing every time just about. So if you can get those out of the way right away, and you just get them down by learning those skills and going over those problems every time you get them wrong in the initial part of the exam, that'll help you do this strategy effectively. And again, it's a hard strategy to use, but at least try to work towards it. At least have that goal of, okay, I'm gonna try to answer the first 30 questions in the first 20 minutes. That'll at least get you off on the right foot for the exam, so you're going as fast as possible and not wasting time at the beginning. And the key to this is that if you get stuck on a problem, or if you just really don't know what to do, then it is what it is. You can skip it, come back to it later, but that's kind of what you have to do at that point, especially at the beginning of the exam. You don't want to waste time. Now for reading, I'm going to give you a little bit of a different spin of advice, because I've been going over for math and English, like how to look over mistakes and that kind of thing. For reading, I want to talk about specifically what your strategy should look like, or what it shouldn't look like. So if you haven't done an exam before for reading, then definitely take a practice exam. Now, I would recommend that you watch some of our reading videos where we discuss how to skim, the different ways to skim, the different ways to time yourself, the ways to annotate and understand a passage better. These are different for every student. I'm not going to get into all these strategies right now because this is supposed to be a shorter video for cramming, and I'm not going to get into every little detail about the reading strategy. But one thing, there are a couple things that I will highlight. First of all, I recommend, just based off what I've seen most students succeed with on the reading exam, that you read the passage first. Most students that I've seen that have gotten a 30 plus on the reading exam, they read the passage first in about 2 to 3 minutes. That's what I did. And you do the questions in the rest of the time. So that gives you about 30 to 40 seconds per question. Also, I recommend that you annotate the passage as you go through it, looking for 3 main things: relationships, emotions, and events. Just things that, those are things that tend to be asked about in the questions a lot, and they tend to pop up in the passage as main themes quite a bit. So relationships could be like between people, or between objects, or between time periods, or something like that. Emotions, self-explanatory. Events, important events, lapses in time, that kind of thing. Okay, if you do those things on the reading exam, if you annotate them, if you circle and underline those 3 main things, and if you do the stuff in 2 to 3 minutes, the reading, then you should be set to having at least a better score on the exam. Now, one thing I will say, if you have a strategy you've been using already, and it's very different from what I just said, don't do a 180 the week of the exam, because you might find that practicing this strategy actually hurts you because you don't have enough time to actually practice it and get the hang of it. So don't do a sharp 180. If your strategy is kind of close to what I'm talking about, like maybe you just read in depth right now, then give this a try. But if you've never done anything like this, then I wouldn't say do it, because it's a bit too late to do a whole switch. Do it at your own risk. I wouldn't personally recommend it. For science, this is the last of the tips that I had. This is where, similar to reading, I have 3 things that I recommend you look out for. In general, what I recommend you do is, again, skim the passage. I recommend that you do the questions after, because again, for most students, that's what I've seen work best. And then lastly, annotation is important. I'll talk about some main things that you look for. So the skimming, try to do this in 1 to 2 minutes. As for the annotation, again, circling and underlining things is very important. It just helps you understand, remember, and recall information a bit better. It increases your focus, because a lot of students find that they zone out during the science exam. The 3 things that you should be looking out for in science are variables, relationships, and differences. So variables, what are the inputs? What are the outputs of the experiment? What's the independent variable, the dependent variable, control variable, that kind of stuff. Differences, relationships is the second one. This is like looking at how the different variables are related. So as one thing increases, one variable, what happens to another? Perhaps you're given an XY axis with a graph. What kind of relationship can you notice? Is there like a certain trend in the data? If you're given like different columns of data in like a table, do you notice as you go down one column, something happens to the other column? Noticing those relationships or trends or things like that will help you understand what the actual data is telling you. It's just all about relationships. And the last thing is differences. Basically, if you're given multiple experiments or viewpoints on a passage, look for the similarities and differences between those experiments or those viewpoints, if applicable. All right. That's the general summary of my strategies. Now, the last thing I'll say is, if you need practice materials or practice exams, free practice exams, official exams, then be sure to check out the link below. We have 6 free practice exams linked below on our site. We also have some other practice content and courses there as well. So I'll give a quick summary of the strategies. The first thing was, make sure you have your practice exams straight. I would recommend do about 1 or 2 full exams this week, and try to use all the strategies that I talked about. In terms of math and English, look over your mistakes. Watch those videos that I recommended for English about grammar and punctuation. I'll link them below. For math, use the timing strategy, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, half exam for each part. For reading, remember relationships, emotions, events. and get your timing straight. Don't do a sharp 180 on your reading and science strategy at the last second because it can hurt you. And then for science, be sure to look for those variables, relationships, differences, and just practice the strategy. Annotating will help you stay a bit more focused. So that's it for this video. I hope this was helpful. Best of luck prepping, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I'd love to answer and help you guys out with anything that you're wondering or trying to figure out with your prep. All right, best of luck.